resting. I want to read a paragraph from yesterday's devotional by Sri Aurobindo's partner in Pondicherry, India, a woman called the Mother. So she writes a daily devotional and she addresses each one to the divine. She says, "Sweet Master of love, grant that all my consciousness may be concentrated in thee, so that I may live only by love and light, and that love and light may radiate through me and awaken in all on our journey. May this physical journey be like a symbol of our action, and may we leave everywhere a trace of thee, like a trail of light and love." So why are we doing silence and spiritual growth and learning about Sabbath as radical rebelliousness against the busy culture? So that we can know more love and be that beacon of light out into the world. I'll say just a few words about silence. The more deeply we go into silence, we bump into the edge of the divine. And as many of you know from reading about mysticism, of course, the divine is 100% already inside us and 100% around us at every moment. So we're not really going anywhere except into a different vibrational frequency. And when we get quieter and quieter and quieter and we bump into the edge of the divine, the brain seems to want to make an image. So it might be the image of a father or a mother or a nipple that is giving you food, or a wave of water washing over you, or 1,000 things. And so it's not that God is a father or a mother or a nipple or a wave of water. It's that there are many, many facets of the divine. And when we get into the deepest of quiet, we bump into the edge, like the trailing cloak of light of the divine, and we are given what we need. So the presence of the divine is very, 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 very real in the silence, and it's very physical. Sometimes in the silence, the divine will call our name and like literally say your name. And in that moment, you know that you are being seen by the one that loves you more than anybody can love you. So your name, being seen, being given energy, and also showing our assignments, because we're here for very, very specific reasons in our relationships and in our service. And that way of being in relationships and that way of serving is constantly being updated and fine-tuned and tweaked. And the silence is the way of, or is a wonderful way, and for many of us, the main way of listening about relationships, about the planet, about our service. So now we'll shift and we're going to focus a little bit more about the idea of holding the tension of opposites between giving lavishly in our service and in our families and friends and resting. So in Jungian psychology, most of you have already heard this, that we're taught to sit and hold the tension of opposites and wait until a sacred third comes through. So if you're trying to make a decision or you're balancing two opposite parts of your personality, you might sit with one side of that and be honoring it, and you might sit with the other side of it and be honoring that. And then you're trying to make a decision about something, you might sit with all that until a third way comes through. And the promise is that if you can tolerate holding the tension of opposites and sit with it in the quiet long enough that a third way that integrates both of those opposites, as well as gives you possibly even a new idea, will come through. So the opposites we're going to explore today are lavish giving and sitting and resting. Before we talk about giving, I want to review a concept that many of you have heard me teach about before. Hal and Sidra Stone were Jungian analysts and spiritual teachers that wrote extensively about our personality being made up of many different selves. And the primary selves are the parts of us that are the heavyweights in our psyche. They're the parts, if you looked at all of our interior selves, the primary selves weigh about 3,000 pounds. And they are the ones that have the muscle and boss us around and tell us what to do. For many of us, it might be our responsible self, or our know-it-all self that's certain about everything, or our pleasing self, or our hardworking self. So here's the vulnerable child, and then here are our primary selves that we developed when we were very young as a way to not feel vulnerable. And because we were good at certain things, people rewarded us for being in certain ways. And so we have an internal computer operating system where we believe that our primary selves are actually, that's who we are. And as you grow on the journey, you gradually around midlife start to see your primary selves as a wonderful gift that's been developed that helps you succeed in the world. Most people get their paychecks because of their primary selves. People are hiring their primary selves, not their disowned selves. And so you begin to know, who are these giant bossy people inside me that think they know everything that I'm supposed to do. So our giving can simply come out of the primary self. So we have a program for happiness that Richard Rohr calls it, that is kind of our operating system. Like, what do I think I need to do to have a good day? I mean, my rules are get enough sleep, do my meditation, do some study, get some exercise, make a list. There's a big every day, make the list and do what is on the list as best I can, and put in the big rocks first, what has to be done, and wiggle in all the little things I can possibly accomplish with smaller rocks. You know, everybody has an operating system of what they value. Well, when you're giving, what really we would love to do is we would love to have enough silence between the divine and our daily life to connect with our truest, deepest soul. And out of that silence, to let the giving flow from that, instead of primarily giving from our primary selves and the programs that we have there. So there are many things that happen to our abundant and generous giving when we give from a place of continued silence. The first thing that happens is our giving or our service, as I mentioned earlier, gets updated. Because I may have all these rules about, this is my ministry, this is my service, these are my people, this is my life. And in the silence, that may be changed. You may have a different assignment, or it may not be changed, but you may see a way that you need to give that love differently. And it's only in the silence, in my opinion, it's primarily, maybe only is too strong a word, but it's primarily in the silence that the divine updates our computer programming. I'm supposed to be giving what? Giving to whom? Instead of just giving out of our stories that we have made up in our lives. This is my story and I'm sticking to it. So I need to get up and remember this person's birthday and that flat tire and this puppy and that. So for the stories to have a chance to be updated, there needs to be silence. The second thing about giving lavishly in silence is, if we really are just like in the hokey pokey, you put your whole self in, you know, you take your whole self out, put your whole self in. If we're going to put our whole self in and we're going to like really give, like lavishly give love, give time, give energy, give projects, give hope. The second thing that silence does is that's where you get your energy. You do not get your energy out of your own little motor. When you are listening to what the divine wants you to do, so that your giving is mission congruent with you and the divine, then there needs to be a lot of juice to pull this stuff off. Where does the juice come from? Where does all that energy come from to be able to be lavish lovers and lavish givers? A lot of it comes in the silence. Hal Stone taught me when I was a very young therapist that it takes 10 times as much energy to do something you really do not want to do as it takes to do something you really do want to do. So the silence lines you up with what your highest self and the divine want you to do, and then it gives you the energy to pull that off. And the third thing, there are hundreds of things that the silence does to our giving, but the third one that I want to mention is, okay, so we've listened, we think we're mission congruent, and we have all this energy to give lavishly. The third thing the silence does is it is an ongoing process of changing your vibrational frequency into love. Because we can give out of our persona, we can give out of neediness, we can give out of wanting to please others, we can give out of wanting compliments, we can give for 1,000 reasons. But the more you sit in the silence, the giving itself, the vibrational frequency of the giving is unbelievable love, a kind of willingness to sacrifice that is not grim, a kind of willingness to lay down your life for situations and people and causes and projects where you do take up the burden of it, but you are energized and willing and supported in every possible way. So those are some of the things that I think silence can do for our giving. Help us be centered more in what God's will is for the service, finding the energy for it, and having the vibrational frequency come more and more from love. Now let's take a look for just a minute at the opposite. So one part of us is going to be giving lavishly, and the silence is going to help that. What about the resting side? You know, in Christianity and Judaism, we have a long tradition of the Sabbath. And, you know, some Jews honor that maybe more than Christians do. And I'm sure that tradition is also in Buddhism. It's certainly in Hinduism. It has its own surface in Islam. But it's not easy for us to do that rest thing. There's a woman that you may have heard of. Her name is Tricia Hersley. She's an African-American woman who's written a book called Rest is Resistance. And she sees rest. She calls herself the Queen of Nap. And her book is really fun. And as you know, Amazon will bring it right to your door. Her book is really, really fun. So, you know, I grew up in the 60s. So I was a hippie and I marched against Cambodia, the war in Cambodia and all that kind of stuff. So she says, if you want to be back in the 60s and rebel against the culture, what you need to do is take a nap. Because the culture is so driven. And she says it's particularly against African Americans. It's so capitalistic and it's so driven that if you take a nap, that is your rebellion to this culture at this moment in time. You don't need to go march against Cambodia being invaded. That was what you did when you were 20. So she's founder of a thing called the NAP Ministry. And she's raising a call to action to interrupt sleep deprivation and to liberate us from what she calls the grind culture and to interrupt the habits of living at the machine pace. So I think it's a wonderful, creative, and interesting idea that every culture has its own sin or brokenness or darkness that pushes against God's will. And we can't help but be affected by that. And so we are living in a culture where our inner pusher and our own inner anxiety and the beliefs of the culture really believe that more busyness is better. You know, when I was young and I was first reading about vegetarianism and what it had to do with the planet, I think there was a cookbook called More with Less. And so that is what Tricia Hersley's ministry is about. Maybe we will bring her here someday to speak at Love Thy Neighbor on the ministry of rest. So when you're daydreaming about rest, enough sleep, enough time to have enough REM sleep so that you could have nighttime dreams, a nap, meditation falls to me in the rest category, time for daydreaming. You know, there's a thin veil between the divine and our soul. When you're sitting and especially looking at nature and you're daydreaming, the divine can just slip right in there and put the presence of divine love. Some people do forest bathing or simply sit in nature. I think the challenge is to sit in the silence, to know what you need for your own rest, to circumvent the inner pusher that tells you not to do it, to deal with your own anxiety about saying no to whatever you need to say no to get enough rest, to do it without guilt and without manipulation, and just to claim it as your right, just like the air that you breathe and the water that you drink. So we're now at the 20-minute mark of me teaching. And if you have questions, we're going to sit in silence together. And if you have questions or comments or experiences that you want to share about the silence we're going to have or about anything I've said, I will really look forward to it. So I'm going to say a prayer to start our silence, and then I'll ring a bell to end it in 20 minutes. Eternal Father, Divine Mother, beloved friend, Holy One, may our meditation be deep and filled with your Spirit, and may our daily lives reflect this quiet time with you. Amen. We'll take a few minutes for reflection, questions, sharing, comments.
Good morning, Susan.
Jane.
I wrote in the chat that when you were teaching us, teaching about our assignments, and that really resonated with a yearning to want to know more about that. I've heard you talk about that before, but I've never really delved into it other than just hearing that.
You know, I was aware in the silence of the concept that's not new, but that the divine needs people in human bodies, incarnated physically on this earth, to do the divine's work. And we, at this moment, we are each in a physical body. And being incarnated and being in a physical body is the opportunity for however long we're alive to listen to what is the work that the divine would have me do. And it does not have to be big or flashy or dramatic, but just that asking, like, okay, I am still here. It looks like I'm here. I'm healthy enough and I have energy. I'm yours. I belong to you. And I think the divine says to us, I want you, and calls us by name. And the divine sees us like nobody can see us. And in that moment of being seen, the love, when you have a sense that the divine is seeing you and then asking you to serve, because the divine wants divine love to come through incarnated humans on this earth. So the silence is the place to listen for that, because otherwise the service comes out of rules. We've made up these rules, and that's okay. It's good. I wish some of our sociopaths on the planet had a few rules. But, you know, once you've had good rules, like, you know, there are rules about how much money you should give away and rules about helping what kind of people, and don't leave out this person. But what we're talking about in the silence is a radical different configuration where you're listening for your assignment and you're putting your rules in a little satin box over here and say, gosh, I'm so glad I had some good rules. But you just put them over there. And then you just listen. And it may be that the rules you had are exactly what God's asking you to do right now, that it's not a change. It's not always a change. It might be confirmation and validation and deepening of a call you've already had, with more energy and more love and more wisdom. But it's the listening in the silence. It's the saying to the divine, I am yours. I do belong to you. I am willing to use my incarnated life for purposes of your love. And I'm willing to stick to the task I have. I'm willing to take on a new assignment. I'm willing to learn new things. I'm willing to do things I never imagined I would do, or do things I always imagined I would do, but I'm going to do it out of the listening and the offering of the self. And the prayer that as you listen and you hear the assignment, the prayer that if it's an old assignment, that you learn how to do it with deeper love. It's a pretty fun process for those of us that love change. You're either going to keep your same assignment, but you're going to change in how you do it, or you're going to get a new assignment, because it's an ever evolving transformation between you and God, and it's pretty darn fun.
I loved what you said. Thank you so much. I'm learning.
We are. just the ability of the group to stay in silence together for 3 minutes. The queen of the nap ministry would love that. She would say, you guys are so rebellious because you can sit in silence together for 3 minutes. I mean, it's very countercultural what we just did. And for those of us that are old, liberal, rebellious hippies, it's really fun to have a way to rebel in a group by being quiet. So
Nancy's hand is up. Nancy.
Thank you for this session, Susan. It's so wonderful to be together in a group and in silence. I actually, I work at a church and I do this work, and I work with also youth and young adults.
wonderful.
And we spend a lot of time in silence together.
Wow.
And we go on retreats without any technology. But you know, I have to ask you a question. What would you say would be the greatest distiller to knowing that it's God's voice you're hearing in the silence, or some of the distillers? Because with them, you know, there's so many. It's different with the youth and young adults. A lot of times they're emotionally charged, or you know, they're coming from a different lens. And I just wanted to ask you that question.
So I'm going to give the cliff notes on this. The first thing is the last newsletter of the House of Prayer, the lead article was about discernment. How do you discern if it's God's voice or not? So I want to make sure, if you don't have that, if you'll email the House of Prayer, they'll get it to you. The second thing is, I have a website. If you just Google my name, and on there is an article about how do you know if it's God's will. So if you think you've heard God's will in a dream or in meditation, what are some traps to run to check? So I'll just toss out a few of them, but there's an article about it on that website, I think, that lists 13 things to ponder if you think it's God. And that's not copyrighted material. You can just take it.
Thank you.
So one thing is, you know, the phrase in literature, one swallow to Capistrano does not a summer make. So one bird getting to Capistrano doesn't mean the seasons have changed. One intuitive hit that you're supposed to go give shoes to kids in Africa wouldn't sell me on uprooting my life to go do that. So you're going to want to hear the message multiple times in multiple ways. So that's one criteria. Another is, if you think you've heard God's will, but there's nobody in your friend group that you can tell the truth to, you better wonder about that. That doesn't mean you're not right, but it's extremely unlikely. If you have a spiritual posse and you think God has told you to, you know, have an affair with your gardener, you know, blah, 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 who's married and has 12 kids and a handicapped wife, and you think God's told you to do that, I'm not saying you're wrong, but if you can't tell it to your spiritual posse, you better wonder about it. So can you tell it to your spiritual posse? Do you hear it over and over? Does it resonate with the core teachings of all the ancient religions? Does it give you more joy? Does it give you more energy? There are all kinds of safety nets to put around it. And my theory on it is, if it's a big, big decision, God will put it to me multiple ways. It will be unescapable. When I was being called from being a private practice therapist into the priesthood, I had, I don't know, almost 2 years worth of dreams about it. It was not a change I wanted to make. And finally, one of my clients showed up in a dream and said, you are leaving your private practice office. And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, you are. And then the next night, I had men with machine guns driving me out of my office. I mean, it took me a couple of years of hearing it. So if it's a big, big change, it will take time, and you will get the message multiple ways, and you'll check it out with ancient traditions in your friend group. So somebody asked the name of the author. It's Tricia Hersley. And I think the book is called Rest as Resistance. Yeah, that's it. So other comments or thoughts?
I think that when we're going through this, the discernment, like you were just explaining, that there's a lot of value as well as to helping others develop the relationship with the holy. So, because then that's how you learn, right? Is it God? Is it not? What is that relationship that they have with, with the holy, with God, with Jesus? Because who knows? And I think you really have to kind of pay attention. I do. That's one of my discernment tools is, does that sound like the Jesus I know? Sharing that. And I think your very valid point of sharing that information with our spiritual posse is very good as well. That's excellent. Absolutely excellent.
And I would rather live a life of listening to the divine through dreams and meditation and occasionally be really wrong than I would not live. And you brought up the beautiful reminder of it's the relationship with the divine and developing it. And I want that, and we all want it so much. I would rather get it wrong occasionally, which has happened. And, my husband has a couple of really embarrassing stories on me when I really got it wrong. And I'd rather live in that goal and flow and attempt and longing for living in harmony with the divine and just occasionally be ridiculously embarrassed. And that's a better option for me. And it makes really hysterical stories about your own failure. Other comments or thoughts?
Just one. This is the book. You kind of
Pardon?
see- This is the book you mentioned by Tricia Hershey. It's just so you can kind of see what it looks like. Okay.
I just want to say thank you for the richness of this time.
It's really nice to be together, isn't it?
It truly is.
Well, let me echo the thanks and the wisdom, the gratitude from all of us, Susan, for your teaching this morning. I would just again remind folks that next month, April 11th, Dr. Catherine Cruz will be our teacher. And then we'll end our season of Mornings with Sacred Silence in May with Annabelle Tuck. She's taught for us before as well. And that will be May 9th. We'll take a break from the teaching aspect of our Tuesday mornings through the summer, come back in September, but we'll continue with the practicing sacred silence every Tuesday for our 30-minute sit together. So with that, I'll just turn it back to Susan. If there's any last comment or blessing you'd like to give us, we'll take it.
When I was in my 20s and I was in the graduate school of social work, and they were teaching you in a class of how to lead a psychotherapy group, one of the things they taught you is that the leader has to be able to tolerate the anxiety of the silence. And what you're trying to do is to get the group to say something. And so they trained us to be quiet, and they promised us if you could be quiet for 20 seconds by the clock and handle your own anxiety, that somebody would talk. And they just haven't been in this group. So those are rules that were helpful for a 25-year-old. And all of that gets completely updated in the explosion of God's love in silence to come out of the prayer and to sit with you all in the silence it's really rich. As Jane said, it's deep, it's profound, and it doesn't fit the rules. I mean, if we were all together, the only place we would all be quiet together is if we were at the symphony, and we might whisper then, which would be okay. But we would just naturally sat in silence together for a while, which happens, and it's a beautiful thing. So blessings on your journey, blessings on your day. If you have topics that you would particularly like to be addressed, especially as we start in the fall, I mean, maybe it would be wonderful for us to have one session on bear challenges in your silence practice. Maybe a time to talk about, well, this is not working quite right for me. Anyway, if you give us some ideas, we would love to respond to specific things that you want to. So I'll close us with a prayer. For the journey, for the quiet, for the community that has been here today, we give thanks. Amen. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.